very grateful for the opportunity to preach for everyone today. I have graduated high school and will be off to college August 21st, so I'm very excited to have this opportunity. In the story, the disciples appear to have a lot of faith, actually, to begin the story of the boat. They dutifully join Jesus in the boat and continue to sail long after evening is dark in the sky and their view of the other side of the lake. Even as Jesus slept, they continued to sail, doing the necessary work with the boat in order to reach the other side so that they all could rest. I imagine the disciples didn't expect to have their faith questioned that evening, long after the lessons Jesus taught to the 12 and to the crowd had been finished. Like us, as well as Job from the earlier Old Testament reading, they had a firm set of understandings of the world that were rarely, if ever, questioned. While we, today, might have a better understanding of how the wind blows than the disciples did or Job, as God questioned his knowledge of the earth at its very foundation, we too have our set of questions for God and the list of things we seem to already have figured out. In our world, we might question or ask God for greater healing, reconciliation in a family, or a revealing of truth. Our schoolwork, house cleaning, and spreadsheets at the office, or in my case, an internship, we can handle ourselves. In the disciples' world, I imagine they too, as we know, have their questions for Jesus, their teacher. Things about the kingdom of heaven, the right hand of the Father, and the life of the faithful. In turn, I imagine they believed they had their realm of daily living figured out. They could handle sailing from one side of a lake to another. They were fishermen, after all, at least 4 of them, and had been doing it daily for years. Like the lake, they had constants in their lives: storms, death, taxes, government, work, learning, cleaning, getting older. A list that doesn't sound entirely unlike the many things we deal with too. While I wouldn't describe our relationship with the knowledge of these earthly constants like work as faith in the way that Christian faith is typically celebrated, there's something to be said for our firm belief in the workings of the natural world. The mystery of faith asks us to search for the threads of God with a watchful eye. The world, on the other hand, is less subtle, and it proves time and time again why we can assuredly have faith that things like suffering, work, and death are for now not going away. Recently, I found myself in a perhaps not as great windstorm in the Great Smoky Mountains a few weeks ago, weathering the night in a camping shelter on top of Mount LeConte. My friends and my circumstances weren't entirely different from the disciples. Like the boat, we had wooden boards to sleep on, and after a long day of walking up a mountain, we found ourselves both physically tired and unable to sleep, kept awake by the stiff shelter, blustering winds, and the ever-lurking possibility of a bear around the corner. I had made a bit of a mistake by packing light, leaving behind my rain-drenched sleeping bag and most of my warm clothes. I marched up the mountain with greater ease than either of my fellow hikers. My spirit was high, my ego was strong, and I felt ready to conquer whatever rest of the day I had left. We set up a spot to sleep in a mountain shelter provided by the park and ate a half-hearted meal in the howling wind. We went to sleep, and by the time I restlessly had decided to put my backpack on over my feet as a sort of large windbreaking sock in the middle of the night, I had successfully been humbled off my high horse and was regretting bringing so few sleeping items. The lesson in humility seemed to continue as the night went on, and while thinking about Mark 4 for this sermon, I found it more and more impressive that Jesus was able to fall asleep in similar conditions. Regardless, I was humbled in my attempts to stay warm and snug against such impressive wind of creation. When the storm hits, perhaps more serious ones, like any other storm, we search for answers, but also in our human nature for care. The darkness of the late evening likely only intensified the fear of the disciples as they imagined what might be in the black water of the lake during that storm, or as they contemplated the possibility that their boat and all of themselves might end up at the bottom of it. The urgency of the moment further cemented realities of the world into the disciples' mind. Danger, emergency, peril, all facts of the world that we deal with seem supremely evident now. As the boat is being swamped, I believe that the disciples demonstrate a rather profound truth of humanity. Working to bail the water out of the boat, they turn to Jesus, not expecting or asking to be saved, but rather to ask, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" It's evident that the disciples didn't expect to have their faiths forever changed when they asked that question. Yet we know Jesus calmly and assuredly demonstrated not only the care of God, but how the hand of the divine might dip to transform our everyday life. It came at a crucial moment, saving the disciples from their storm, just like how it might come into ours at a particularly pressing one as well. In that moment, we might often simply ask for God to care, a seemingly simple and humane request that sometimes feels unanswered in life's more bitter moments. Surely God can simply care. Still, beyond simple caring, it seems that Jesus has demonstrated God will, in fact, take the time to silence and put at rest the whirlwinds that seem to consume us at our lowest. While I cannot say that Jesus' hand is there to calm every storm that arises in our lives, it might be comforting to reflect on the fact and think about how many storms the disciples had endured before that story night. As fishermen, the weather was constantly tossing about their livelihood and their ability to provide for their families. This storm was certainly not the first dangerous encounter with the elements. A bit like the television show Deadliest Catch, the disciples likely had moments of panic in which they were not sure if their boat or lives would prevail. Like Job, we often and rightly demand God explain why the storms of the earth seem to devastate and leave humankind to suffering. Like Job, however, we were not at the laying of the foundations of the earth, and even with all of our technology and understanding of history, we are not able to stand under the questioning of God and for his will of the world. Instead, perhaps, like the calming of the storm humbling the disciples at their very profession, we should look to see the will and expressions of Jesus in something as minute as our daily lives. Like among the disciples going out to sea for some thousandth time, Jesus might have a demonstration of the power of God in our life, death, work, school, and our simply getting older. After a day of preaching to thousands of people, inspiring the 12 disciples, and spreading the news of salvation across Galilee, Jesus still manages to transform the mundane and makes a faith-inspiring event out of the most humble and the most simple part of their day, the ride home. Under fire from the questioning of God, Job learned the humility to accept that there are mysteries of creation and of God's will. I learned to be a bit more humble in the face of the more powerful elements of God's creation. The disciples were humbled as Jesus transformed the task of their daily profession into a demonstration of faith. With the humility to accept that we aren't masters of even our own lives, Even at the simple things we are best at, we invite Jesus in to demonstrate his will for ourselves and for the world.